Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest, plus their 9% enablers, versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on our post-budget special, the in-studio political panel all-stars tonight are Labour Party finance spokesperson Barbara Edmonds, head of business at NZME Fran O'Sullivan, and former National Party MP and Waatea's parliamentary press gallery reporter Claudette Hauiti. As part of our new show format, we will have a weekly one-on-one 10-minute live interview with a party spokesperson. This week it's Takutai Ferris from the Māori Party to discuss this year's budget. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. God only knows why Goldie thought sending a social media behind-the-scenes photo of the finance minister drinking a glass of sav with the Prime Minister giggling as their flunkies feasted on posh nosh was a good idea. But then again, no one really knows why Goldie does anything other than not stand seriously in Epsom. Without a Marmite sandwich or melted plastic school lunch in sight, the tweet was as tone-deaf as a white farmer singing karaoke at Beyonce night as the budget took $12 billion out of the pockets of workers and put $6 billion into the pockets of the bosses. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, not literally, but literally the government stole from the poor to give to the rich. This isn't trickle-down economics. Nicola Willis wants to defy economic gravity with trickle-up economics. Talking of trickles, like a feminist champion, Chris Bishop was so offended at comments about what Nicola was wearing on budget day that he leapt to her defence by being more offended than any of the women he just took and taken pay parity from. Jumping in to take offence on behalf of someone else is pure outrage Olympics in the never-ending race for the National Party to position themselves as the victim while they deliver kick after kick into the face of beneficiaries, pay equity workers, Māori, Pacifica, the environment, renters and young people. The irony is that while Bishop is declaring this isn't the 1950s, his government is paying women like it is. And finally, in this week's War on News, latest science out last week shows the world's ice sheets are on course for runaway melting, leading to multiple feet of sea level rise and catastrophic migration away from coastlines, even if the world pulls off the miraculous and keeps global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. But it gets so much worse. The level of desalination into our oceans would see the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation current destabilise as early as 2030, which in turn would put at lives the risks of 1 billion people. We are all going to die on a burning planet thanks to the lies of the petro-industrial complex. To quote the great Mike Hosking, happy days. The in-studio political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But first, this week's one-on-one in 10 with Māori Party spokesperson MP Takutai Ferris. Kia ora, comrades. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Hey, kia ora, hoa. Just to clear it up, it's Takutai Ferris.
Takutai Ferris, thank you.
Takutai is my good mate from Tamaki.
I ended the war.
Thank you.
I ended the war on news with the latest science warning of catastrophic ice shelf loss. So let's jump right into the issue the Māori Party have been very vocal over, and that is the environmental obscenity of allowing Trans-Tasman Resources to fast-track the seabed mining operation. Why is this the wrong sort of economic activity being enabled?
Well, because it's just extractive. It comes at a cost. The cost is the environment. The cost, and the cost is ongoing and long. The cost will be around for all of the people of the Taranaki coast and the west coast of the North Island long after Trans-Tasman, whatever their faces names are long gone. You know what I mean? So Māori have got no no qualms about calling this sort of stuff out. I mean, we've done it all around the country for decades now. We'll continue to do it, and we continue to do it because there's no future in it for our kids.
Māori have...
Not to mention that all those profits, they're off overseas.
Yeah.
They're not staying here.
Yeah. Māori have cultural memory of the first wave of settler capitalist exploitation. They have the flax roots knowledge of what sustainability and environmental protection looks like. It is no wonder, is it not, that international right-wing think tanks always aim to attack Indigenous rights first to enable the next generation of exploitative resource stripping.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, if you look at it sort of tactically, one of the very last roadblocks that's going to be in front of any company or government are going to be the Indigenous people's rights, the customary rights that the Indigenous people have. And those customary rights, they aren't afforded to us by any government or anything. They're internationally recognized. They're the same in every country around the world. They don't just disappear. You have to deal with them. And so what we've got, currently is a government who's just really keen, hell-bent, you might call it, on getting rid of those things, creating processes where they can override them for the benefit of all, they say, which is truly just the benefit of a few. And so, that naturally leads them to attack that, and then double that down, the fact that in this country, that as they attack that, they actually fire up their own voting groups and get more support from them. So it's really not a good, it's not a good combination of circumstances when you think about what the reality of looking after an environment is long into the future, and who has to shoulder that burden in the future is going to be our kids and our grandkids.
What do you think of Mihi Forbes' latest critical analysis on matter of David Seymour's links to extreme far-right think tanks?
Oh, I think it just shows you that right from a young man, he's been influenced by this type of stuff. Any sort of far-right think tank coming out of Canada who's been involved in that whole political scene since they went in and bulldozed over the Indigenous people, then continued to exploit all of the things that they could, whilst the Americans were just over the road doing it even worse down there. I think, if that's the sort of people, leadership that he's been around, the things he's been listening to through his 20s, into his 30s, it's no wonder he's doing the stuff he's doing now.
Do you think New Zealanders would be surprised to know the level of influence the domestic right has with the international right?
Oh, definitely. I think here in Aotearoa, we're a little bit head down, a little bit in the sand too much. But look, colonization is an international phenomenon, and New Zealand is inextricably linked to the colonizing effects of America, of Canada, of Australia, of here.
Do you see
that's not new news?
Yeah. Do you see a double standard in a white middle-class politician like Brooke Van Velden saying the C word in Parliament and receiving no punishment, and a brown woman performing a haka and suddenly it's the end of Western civilization? Whose standards are dropping in Parliament?
Oh, it's clear to see that the standards of Parliament are probably at the lowest point they have ever been. The quality of debate in Parliament right now has got to be the lowest it's ever been allowed to be. And it's doing that because there's really no clear, commitment, and there's no clear playing field for what and where Te Tiriti o Waitangi is to be either adhered to, upheld, included, considered. None of that exists. So it allows all of this sort of racist policy, rhetoric, behavior to just spew out every day. And quite literally, I would say that the quality of debate in Parliament in 2025 is most likely the lowest that has ever been. And it's because all of this far right stuff and this just straight out racial politics, bashing Māoris has just been allowed to happen. And, if you ask me, the way to fix all of that is just to bring Te Tiriti o Waitangi into the centre of the house.
Why was that haka so important for Māori?
Oh, the haka was just the natural Māori response. I had a quick listen to your last show. I think JT was on it, a couple of others, and they were saying, it was a political stunt. It wasn't no political stunt. We're of a generation who grew up where these things are just naturally Māori. It's just naturally who we are.
Sure.
And I can tell you 100% that in the face.
Oh, come on, technology. Don't let me down now. He's frozen. Can we get him back? Oh, I've got so many more questions. We're frozen. We're going to have to move on. Unfortunate, because I wanted to talk about David Seymour. Thank you, comrade. We will have to try and get you another time on the show next month. It's the reality of live podcasting. Okay, now to our in-studio political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is a doyen of the political right, and alongside Simon Wilson, Shane Tapo and Matthew Hooton is the only reason you would buy a New Zealand Herald subscription. NZME Head of Business, Fran O'Sullivan. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please.
Pragmatic.
Pragmatic. Our next panellist is a mother of 8, a high-ranking Jedi Knight and the left's last great hope, Labour Party finance spokesperson Barbara Edmonds. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the week.
Kia ora. I'd say fiery.
Fiery. And finally, she's a former National Party MP whose journalistic style is more akin to a great white shark at lunchtime. Waatea's parliamentary gallery reporter, the indomitable Claudette Hauiti. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Me tuku mihi anō ki a koe boma, rawi ki te kōrero i a koe tēnei pō.
One word to describe the week, please.
O he tino pauri, te wā pauri mō te ao Māori, mō te ao Pasifika, mō te ao nā tangata e whai rawa, e kore rawa, e kore kainga. He tino pauri, a very sad week, very sad budget for us all.
Comrade, let's start tonight's post-budget special. Fran, Matthew Hooton has been scathing of the debt repayment figures, suggesting Nicola Willis has underestimated a true borrowing costs by billions and billions of dollars. Are the $73 billion in borrowing debt repayment forecasts fair or delusional?
Well, time will tell on all these things. I mean, clearly what they're going to have to do is track as things go along, and they will have to shift if necessary. We don't know. I mean, they've done a massive thing, a massive potential kicker to the economy with the tax issues around, the investment boosts, that side of thing. Effectively a big bunch of accelerated depreciation that foreign companies and local companies can take up. So, to me, I'm a little bit concerned that if they have miscalculated and too many people pile in, that there might be an issue. Because everyone I've been speaking to is thinking, oh, well, field day's coming up, that'll be a ripper. What else are we doing? Are we going to buy, do wind farms? There's a range of...
Sure.
It can be very attractive.
Right.
Could be too attractive.
It's not capped, right?
No, it's
so
not
it's
capped.
Open.
Well, these things, and Barbara would know from her tax days, I mean, people are watching it all the time. Yeah. And if they do need to, nip and tuck it, they'll have to, in my view. But they have to keep a good eye on both the debt, but also what we're doing to kind of spur growth. And that's basically the only serious engine at the moment.
So if Trump spooks the markets with something crazy and the bond markets go nuts at him and we see a sudden jump in what they're going to be charging, would you suggest then that the government will have to start cutting more things? If the debt starts really spiralling because it starts to pay a lot more, could we see more cuts?
No, I don't think the government will do that, but I think what they'll probably look to do is how much ballast they're giving. Yeah. But I would think they're hoping that there is some degree of sense out there. I mean, we've got the tariff pause at the moment between China and the US, and Europe is looking
just started
pretty
a new
sticky.
one. Trump just started a new one.
But we don't know whether that's part of his deal-making persona and the way he goes about stuff, or whether it's actually real. And so I think here people are holding back. In New Zealand, we haven't really, pushed our chin out anywhere in any of this.
No.
We've kept it totally subterranean. Yep. And I think we're just hoping to sort of find our way through. But that said, one of the things at the moment, which has been an advantage, is where the exchange rate has been positioned. So that has been helpful. Yeah.
Has it surprised you that the global economy seems to not want to be in American dollars? that they're walking away from that, because that's why we're getting pretty good, reasonable numbers there.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's really interesting is the Chinese and others have been, and particularly the BRIC nations,
Yes.
have been looking to see what they can do about moving away from US dollar
Yes.
denomination
Yes.
in everything. Currently, our trade is predominantly in USD.
Yep.
So we, at the moment, it's really costly to go overseas and do stuff. But if you are an exporter and you're getting your returns in USD, and you've got high returns anyway, for instance, like milk powder in
Sure,
China, all
sure,
of that.
sure.
However, the Chinese and others are saying, why don't we move away?
Barbara, the Greens have spotted a $700 million hole in government's budget by not factoring in the extra 1% of KiwiSaver payments for state workers. Is that a fair criticism?
I think it's fair because the government's response to it is to ridicule the Greens' comment about that.
They didn't come up with an answer at all.
No, so it does point to, okay, if you're going to ridicule the Greens, so be it. That's your political stance. But actually, show us the money.
Yeah.
Where is it in those baselines
Yeah.
where you have increased to account for that 0.5 and then 0.1% growth or contribution in KiwiSaver? The interesting thing as well that's come out of the KiwiSaver is the government is saving around $2.3 billion by cutting that government contribution in half. What they haven't also said is that they're actually taking in more employer superannuation contribution tax. They're taking about $1.2 billion extra because they've increased the contribution by employees.
Yeah.
It means they get to tax a bit more of it. So they're taking with one hand and also taking with the other by saying, we're not going to give you the give you the government contribution, but we're also going to tax you more because your contributions have gone up.
Charming. Claudette, in this budget and last budget, Māori have lost $1 billion in Māori-specific funding, and many of the 200,000 who had pay equity kneecapped are Māori women. Are Māori the economic collateral damage this budget?
Yeah, absolutely. We were the biggest losers, and 29% of that budget, the cuts from that budget, or that were identified in that budget, came from Māori, cuts to targeted Māori funding, and also to the pay equity. So we were the biggest losers, along with Wahine, and of course we are, as you had mentioned, we are in that as well too. 757 million in this budget and 350 million in the previous budget, so over $1 billion cuts to targeted Māori funding. Now, David Seymour had said that targeted funding is racist. However, we have found that when you give Te Ao Māori the lead on a lot of these initiatives, it reaches the outcomes extraordinarily well, whatever the government
So it saves money. It saves money long term, right?
Well, not just for Māori, but for all of New Zealand. So the Prime Minister is intent on saying all of New Zealand for the betterment of all New Zealand. Actually, we have contributed to that. As an example, with $75 million going to Toi Tū Rāwhiti for their build. So they not only build whare, and it came first and under a Labour government, not just whare for our whānau in Te Tai Rāwhiti Māori me Pākehā, but they also helped supply whare to the Hawke's Bay and to Wairoa during the floods.
Right.
So we are everywhere, and that has been done with targeted Māori funding, not just for Māori, but primarily but for all those who are within that those communities within those hapori.
This is our first quick round. Who is this budget's biggest winners and biggest losers? Fran, biggest winner, biggest loser?
Business is a winner.
Yes.
The loser side, pay equity. Yeah.
Sure. Barbara?
The winners are businesses who have money to invest in capital.
Yep.
So there's a bit of a distinction there. And then the losers are definitely working women.
Claudia?
Māori, working wahine, are the biggest losers, absolutely, and the biggest winners are, I agree with Barbara, businesses that can afford this. And also, too, I just want to say the other biggest loser in this is the coalition government come 2026.
Wow. You think that there'll be a real political response?
Absolutely. Labour are going to oxygenate the pay equity right up until polling booth.
Oh, you know they will. Barbara, sanctioning teenagers on welfare, rising unemployment, more child poverty, less money for Radio New Zealand to keep this government accountable, and $700 million less for Māori. Some have argued There is no economic vision here, but surely the steep Doge-like cuts is the economic plan, isn't it?
So first of all, this budget was brought to you by women. Be really clear on that. So every particular initiative that has had funding put to it, a big chunk of that, $12 billion, has come out of the future pay packets of women. Yeah. In relation to all those other initiatives where they're taking away entitlements, where they're saying to 18 and 19-year-olds, get off your parents' couch, the question I have is, what have you got to help them get off the couch? First year free is now third year free.
Yeah.
You don't have the apprenticeship boost. What initiatives are you doing for those children or those young people not in education, employment and training to get them off the couch? Because you know what? The job market is really tight.
5.1% unemployment.
And it's going to increase to 5.4%. And so where are the jobs for these young people? Where are the jobs for these middle-aged people? And they're saying, we know where the jobs are. They're in Australia.
Follow-up question. We have $200 million for tobacco subsidies, $14 billion for tax cuts we can't afford, $3 billion for landlord loopholes, $12 billion for the army, and $30 million for military boot camps that don't work, but no money for the pay parity workers. Did people understand the fine print of this government when they voted with post-COVID bitterness at the last election? Did voters really understand just how steep the cuts were going to be?
Well, they didn't campaign on the pay equity changes. And despite what Nicola Willis said on Jack Tame this weekend, where they said they didn't campaign on increasing the abatement threshold for working for families up to $50,000, she said that was not a priority. Well, actually, it's in their fiscal plan. It was in their manifesto because they basically copied the Labour Party working for families policy. So you also forgot that almost $500 million for the big tech giant companies.
Who could forget that? Yeah. $500 million. And what's the reason for that again?
Through the withdrawal of the digital services tax, because apparently overseas those conversations, which I have been part of for about a decade, apparently they're doing really well. But anyway, beside that point, they are absolutely taking with one hand. They are giving and giving to someone else, but it's at the cost of, and again, I go back to it, it's at the cost of women.
Claudette, your interview with Minister Potaka on Waatea on Budget Day was incredible and fascinating. I have never heard a Minister of the Crown drown live on air. Minister Potaka's weak answers when challenged by you on the missing $700 million in Māori funding suggested a minister who didn't fight for anything and accepted what he was given. What does that say about the level of respect for Māoridom in this government?
So, for Te Ao Māori, our māngai is the Minister for Māori, regardless of which, aha ko te party. The Minister for Māori is our māngai. So, however that government or that party treats that minister is a reflection of their attitude towards Te Ao Māori katoa. That's our perspective.
Right.
And so when we see him being nobbled following the Treaty Principles Bill, not being able to speak to that.
That was amazing. That was an amazing decision by the National Party to not let the minister speak, surely?
When we see the cuts to the budgets, I know that every minister fights for every cent.
Totally.
And I know that he would have fought for every cent that he got. But a lot of the pūtea that Māori did get, like for the Waatea Māori and Māori Women's Welfare League and even the Pacific Wardens,
yes.
Māori Wardens, we know they came from New Zealand First. They did not come from the National Party. So we get a sense here that, we're being treated as the tēnā within this treaty relationship of this coalition government. And from our observation of our Minister Potaka, he also conducts himself in a tēnā role, as a tēnā to his tuakana who are his colleagues, and he also refers to them, his colleagues who are also ministers, as rangatira. He also is our rangatira. They are kanohi ki te kanohi. They are the same, and when he speaks like that, he relegates relegates us
himself to a junior member. Is that the way you're seeing it?
Yeah. to a junior position within that treaty partnership.
Right.
And that's how we're hearing it from Tama. So when he can't, talk to us about where this money has gone or why the money has gone or what the plan is. So as an example, trade training schemes, Māori trade training, that's been completely scrapped. That was part of Shane Jones's Provincial Growth Fund, get the NEFs off the couch.
Yeah.
That's all gone now. So what's the plan here? 3 times he referred me to Minister Louise Upston. But that's Māori trade training, and he needs to be across that. And unfortunately, we're not getting that from our Māngai Minister Paul Tucker.
Follow-up question. Willie Jackson, in his 6 years with Labour, managed to gain over $3 billion in extra funding for Māori. When critics argue, what is the point for Māori to vote Labour, or why be a Māori in the Labour Party, Willie Jackson has given them over 3 billion reasons, hasn't he?
Yeah, to fight really hard for that, and when Grant Robertson left, he also mentioned that, Willie was, smashing on his door, banging on his door to get that pūtea.
Yeah.
But he worked really hard for it, and it is a negotiation, and you do have to be really smart and clever. In the previous national government, when I was in the party, Hekia Parata worked really hard to get her pūtea and some of the pūtea for Māori education within that. Te Pāti Māori worked really hard with Finlayson around the treaty settlements, Bill English as well too. So,
but it sounded like you had partners or people who were prepared to partner up. Is this government just not prepared to with ACT in the mix?
So I know that you mentioned twice now that I was 3 times, a previous National Party MP.
Amen.
This National Party is nothing like the National Party of John Key and Bill English.
Right.
Now, in my, Iokane Whakaaro, in my opinion, John Key is kind of similar fiscally as Christopher Luxon, but there's no Bill English in this current National Party that looks at the social aspect and the impact on the wider decisions that they make fiscally, and nor is there a Chris Finlayson around treaty settlements and listening to our hapori.
Fran, will the 20% rebate on equipment and capital be enough to kickstart the economy when many small businesses have already argued they don't have the cash flow to use that?
Yeah, and that's a valid point. But however, at the top end or medium-sized businesses and foreign businesses, we do need it. And there is another way of actually approaching it, and it could have been to lower the tax rate as well, and whether that might have been an incentive into foreign capital in particular. But there's many ways you can actually screw that around, and I actually think this is probably more honest and getting investment happening. We do need investment. Who knows, what they can do further down the track. Personally, I'd like to see a special rate for SME's tax rate, which is quite different. Yep. But the big thing is you've still got to be in profit. And I know that awful nasty word, profit.
Terrible word.
Which you don't like.
Oh,
but hell's teeth, if you don't have profit, you can't pay people. You go out of business. Tax department comes calling if you can't pay your PAYE to your people, all of that. So, I mean, it's this has been interesting to watch this debate in Parliament, particularly between Chloe Swarbrick and also the Prime Minister about profit, which I kind of think, late stage capitalism, what the hell are we doing arguing about it at this stage of the game? But it's been very, very entertaining to watch. But, it's difficult for anyone. And you started out by putting up there that big debt monster, that big figure up there. This is not going to be easily swallowed. I mean, this is, it's Python and pig territory, frankly. Right. And we do need to get going, and we do need to be cognizant that we have been slaughtered and bashed, every decade or so by a major disaster. We've had, we were very lucky with Kaikoura that it wasn't Wellington City that went down. But part of the problems with the Wellington City Council and the rates is the fact that they were so damn stupid at the time that they didn't actually declare a state of emergency and actually ask for government cash. In the same way that Christchurch did, and it had all its horizontal infrastructure done with Crown contributions, insurance contributions and contributions from the council. Wellington didn't do that, and you cannot fool me that you get all these geysers just by suddenly a bunch of bunch of pipes running out. It's more than that. So there's been stupidity there. But what I'm trying to say is, we are vulnerable, and we do. And if it's not that, it's, Auckland getting slammed by these rivers, water rivers coming, and, which we'd never experienced before, atmospheric rivers.
Yes.
What we saw on the East Coast, which is also a big lump of cash and debt that, the economy is having to face. So I'm not sure, but I really do think, while I've talked about SMEs paying a lower rate than the corporate rate, I do actually think that in the longer term, income taxes at the personal level and capital gains taxes and superannuation adjustments all need to be made.
They're going to have to be made.
Yeah, I do feel that.
Follow-up question, how does one go for growth with a slower GDP growth forecast, higher borrowing, less housing spending, lower KiwiSaver contributions and a net fiscal contraction of 3 percentage points of GDP? It doesn't read like much of a program for growth.
Well, I mean, she, fiscal draws in a twist, really, when you get down to it. I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah.
You need it. The cycle is going to take longer to come out the other end, and then you've got what's happening internationally, as you mentioned earlier with Trump. We've seen $1 billion re-tariff income, hitting the economy. So all that is coming together at the same time. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier, which is helpful, is the lower exchange rate. We've got quite high pricing with some of our commodities at the moment, but we're not getting, a mass number of tourists into here.
No.
The China situation is absurd with visas.
Yes.
So, some of those big poultices of cash just aren't arriving. So, it's going to be harder for a while, and we're just going to have to suck it up, in my view.
Claudette, at National's International Investment Summit, iwi literally had to force their way into the meeting to make their case for investment when the Māori economy is valued at over 40 billion annually, with over 120 billion in assets. Why does this government seek international investment rather than iwi investment?
So a couple of things on that. $20 million got taken away from the Acceleration Fund, Māori Acceleration Economy Fund. Oh. And so if this government is intent on economic, growth, then why take that from Māori? The second thing, going back to that summit, yes, Māori had to ask to be there. The Prime Minister had actually said to us in post-cab that they were invited, that he had spoken to them and they were invited. I got a couple of iwi that said that they actually weren't invited, they just turned up. And then when they did show up, they had then told the international investors that they don't actually have to go to government, you can come straight to us.
Right.
So there is that. Now, going to your question, why do they not ask Māori to go into partnership?
Sure.
Well, of course, under the Labour government, they had, partnerships, and particularly around water and around infrastructure. You see that happening with Ngaitahu. That's happening with Tainui currently. Yes. For the key national voters, they don't like to see or to hear that there is a partnership with Māori to an extent where they feel that Māori is becoming dominant in a relationship and therefore are taking more of a lead role. Now, that's
cultural angst?
Well, I'm not sure. You'll have to ask your own people that. But from observation,
they're very frightened.
Yeah, that whole, collaboration. What word did they use before?
Co-governance.
Co-governance. It's all about co-governance. There is a certain sector of voter that is very anti-co-governance.
Right.
And so the government, although and it doesn't matter which party, although they do look at partnerships with iwi on a range of areas, they don't like to promote that too much.
Right. Oh, I don't agree with that. I mean, I was...
on in, Fran?
Yeah, I do want to jump in on that. I was actually at the infrastructure summit, and I was in the room when the presentations happened by Māori, not just Māori, but a whole range. Yep. And I think people were pretty proud, frankly, and it was good. I mean, the people presenting, Tuka Morgan and others, It was very professional. There were one-on-one meetings happening directly with investors. We've seen some big deals come out of it already. And, frankly, some of those things being done in Waikato are fantastic.
Okay, so that's
on the
that,
infrastructure
right?
side.
So that's that. But, Fran, when it comes to things like kura, when it comes to things like taiao, when it comes to things like housing, there is no cooperation from the government with Māori to take those leads. It's a political choice and a political decision. Now, so Māori were very professional. How wonderful that we were so professional. We had a summit. So that's a kind of corridor narrative that we find are really belittling, actually.
Well, I didn't feel that those people were... No, woo-woo. I mean, hear me out. I was absolutely proud of the people presenting. They are skilled business people. They're doing fantastic deals on infrastructure. They,
where is the equity in funding for it to allow, or the equity in investment to allow Māori to take their lead when it comes to international trade and export and investment? We do that, but there is a lot of compliance that we have to meet. Trade and export, have a lot of rules and regulations around where we can go, what we can do, how much we're allowed to invest. Make no mistake about it, there is not the type of lead that we would like to have. No matter what you say, and no matter what your observation is, you don't live it.
Fran, isn't there...
Well, I don't think you live the same experiences. I mean, you're doing a blanket thing.
Yes, I am.
You are doing a blanket thing. And I
am.
I don't...
And I can.
Well, you can, but you don't have to.
But I can and I will.
Yeah, but not everybody is in a victimhood kind of approach.
We're not in victimhood and we're not in grievance mode either. And so that's the default argument that Pākehā people use on us, that we always go into. There we go.
There you go.
Fran, isn't there a significant existential threat to free market globalisation with Trump in power? If we are to be true to our independent small trading nation state, shouldn't we be way more focused on trading with the BRICS than Trump's protectionist America?
Well, we're still doing relatively well with America, but we don't have a free trade deal with them. We've actually succeeded in spite of it, and we've actually basically manoeuvred around. We haven't looked for, getting tariff reductions. What we've tried to do is create partnerships to, produce high-value goods, that type of thing, be it something like, zero-carbon beef into the American market. Now, they're all going to get slammed. Our wine's going to get slammed.
10%,
yeah, but we at the same time, we still have a very valuable market with China. Obviously that's still pretty major for New Zealand, and we'd be a bit lost without it, really. But same time,
so that moving towards the BRICS would be a smarter play.
Well, we are, obviously trying to get in bed with India. We haven't done anything with Brazil. Going back probably to John Key's days, about 2010 or 13 or so, when he led a mission there. But, we're still small.
Right.
We have got, the previous government did with UK and EU. Those are damn good, benefits.
Yep.
We are now steadily starting to make more income from that. We've got the UAE and also Gulf states as well. I think we actually do pretty well with the doors we open. It's just possibly not having enough people to go through at times, in my view.
Barbara, is there enough in this budget to stop the exodus of Kiwis fleeing to Australia?
No. If you are a low or middle income working family, you've got the most that you would have got out of this budget if you receive working for families is $7 a week. But there are 61,000 families because of the interplay between the working for families abatement threshold and the best start payment.
Yep.
There's 61,000 families who are now $43 worse off a fortnight.
Yep.
So why would you stay here when it's hard to find a job, hard for you to get your first home if you're not in your first home, hard for you to basically get government entitles because the criteria keep tightening.
Yes.
If you are a working, and the stats show that, it's working age New Zealanders who are migrating overseas.
Yeah.
I just want to add on to Fran's point around, and your question around BRICS and what else is happening in our export markets. Actually, what I really want to see is the CTPP strengthened. We know we have issues in the Pacific.
Yes.
We know that as a region between us, Australia, some of those Southeast Asian countries in the Pacific, our government should be talking to all these leaders and saying, where are the chinks in your supply chain?
Right.
Where are the chinks in all our supply chain? And we should be working together as a region to figure that out.
Yes.
Because that way, if whatever's going to happen in overseas, and we know lots is happening in different places,
Right.
we know that as a region, we can support each other during this time. Don't wait for the pandemic. Don't wait for the crisis. Do the work now and strengthen those already well-established relationships and work out how we as a region, if we had to, work independently because we've got the distance, it's not too far away.
Yeah.
We've got the manpower across all our different jurisdictions and work together. We need to have a plan B just in case.
Quick round. Seeing as this budget is underpinned by free market capitalism, a quick reality check to us as consumers and citizens. So a block of butter. We created a monopoly in the form of Fonterra to maximise price negotiations on the global market. But the flip side of that is, for me as a consumer in New Zealand, for a product made in New Zealand, I'm competing with 500 million middle-class Chinese who want that product. New Zealand only has a population of 5 million. We can never compete for price against 500 million middle-class Chinese. On top of that, this butter was created by a cow, which takes water, pollutes water, and generates climate warming emissions. So this product that I've already paid an environmental price in manufacturing it also cost me an arm and a leg because I'm competing with 500 middle-class Chinese. Fran, free market capitalism isn't helping me buy food in my own country. When does Trump's populism start demanding protectionism here?
Well, the interesting thing is every other competitor, which is all the Chinese companies, the French and everyone else, which has got, cows here also. It's not just Fonterra. The market is actually, you've got 3 Chinese dairy companies. You've got everybody else is in that global market. It's kind of interesting. Like when I used to go to China, probably about 20-odd years ago, used to go into small towns and there would be the China price and the foreign price, and the foreigners were the ones that got stuck,
right?
And the locals had smaller price for t-shirts or whatever. So it's really quite a conundrum. It's not easily solved. Do you go and have your own cow? What do you do? Or do you just stop eating butter?
God
I
forbid.
love butter.
God forbid.
But it's a good point.
At what point does it become a political problem?
Yeah,
because I'm saying I can't buy this bloody thing that's made here in my country because I'm competing with a market I'm never going to be able to outprice.
Yeah, but is protectionism actually going to help that? How would that help? By tariffs if it's homegrown? It's a bit kind of a difficult one. You really, you probably get to a point, are you doing food subsidies, locally? That's, on particular basic items.
But when you've given up a monopoly, we've given up the option of having competition in this country so that Fonterra could have this negotiating price. So we've done that, and then still I'm getting screwed on my price of butter.
Yeah, I'm not sure there ever was particularly a monopoly here. There used to be competition among dairy.
Sure.
We actually imposed a monopoly.
Yes, exactly.
But in actual fact, for a while, but now we have a whole pile of other competitors who happen to be Chinese in particular.
Oh, well, yeah.
Here, growing milk and all of that. And milk powder in particular.
Barbara, academic research after academic research shows New Zealand's food security is a major issue. Monopolies and duopolies are continuing to price gouge that food insecurity. Labor failed to break the supermarket duopoly. Why won't any government properly regulate our capitalism?
Well, we did do the market study, right?
Yep.
We needed to have that evidence-based first.
And the evidence was damning.
Yeah.
Damning.
And then we ran out of time because we got booted out. You're going to have to accept
Talk
that.
to the people about that.
But actually, I think there's an opportunity here because when I think of my hometown in Porirua, we have good competition. But you know why? Because we still have a fishmonger we still have a couple of butcheries, we still have a couple of greengrocers, and you have all the major supermarket chains. So the question is, I go back to that small business policy. Yes. What are the incentives that we're providing to these smaller grocers to be able to provide that competition? Because the government's focusing on that third supermarket player, and that's good that there's a focus somewhere around competition, but actually, how do we go back to those days where there was competition from the smaller retailers? What are the barriers for them, and what are the barriers? Why don't we have the Mad Butcher everywhere? Why aren't we having the Prestons everywhere? Why aren't we having the City Greens everywhere? So I think there's a different way you can look at that issue around competition, about how we support SMEs to build up the capability to be more present in these different cities.
But meanwhile, working class families are getting mugged every single time they go to the supermarket.
Which is why you need the government to help them.
Okay, Labour's getting elected in 2 years' time. Okay, Claudette, the old food and school lunch program that Labour, the Greens and Māori Party worked on saw an $8 per lunch that generated 2,000 local jobs and provided healthy, nutritious kai. This government's change to a $3 model provided by a transnational with a terrible overseas reputation has provided awful kai that is 50% less nutritious. Are the school lunch programs an example of free market privatisation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we found some other bug in one of the kai packs just the other day as well too. And so, going back to that localised business model. So in South Auckland, Tamakiki Te Tonga as an example, there were small clusters of whānau who worked in kitchens in the kura to provide lunches for the kura, and knowing that these whānau knew the tamariki and the rangatahi, so they knew
what they like to eat, right?
But also to the size of the kai. So while we have got some really big eaters who are Māori and Pasifika, right? I mean, these kids end up in the All Blacks before they're 20 years old, right? So we are feeding a different type of tamariki, and we're giving them good, nutritious kai. Plus, we're also generating some economy within those communities, and that's what's been taken away.
Yes.
And so the heart and the manaaki around the kai. So, it's not just about the kai either. It's about the aroha and the manaaki that these whānau put into the kai to give their tamariki, knowing full well that they have got warm puku, but also too that kai can go home. So when I ask David Seymour, can they take the kai home, it's not education's job to feed families back there. Yeah. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. Feed the tamariki, feed the whānau.
Quick round question to everyone. 500,000 Kiwis need food banks every month. 1,000 at-risk kids are on Taringa Tamariki wait lists waiting for a social worker, and 19,000 are on social housing wait lists. What was in this budget that will make their lives materially better? Fran?
Very little. It's it's a difficult situation you've got in terms of the food banks as well.
They took a huge hit in terms of how much money they were getting.
Well, they have, because there's been less disposable also within business as well. It's been really tight.
Yep.
If you look at the number of companies that have gone belly up as well, a lot have. And so, you look at the restaurant trade, all of that, closures all over the shop. So, I just don't think there's a quick, easy solution without raising taxes, bringing more revenue into the economy. And again, people will also push back at that. I know when Barbara tries to introduce, the capital gains or wealth or whatever, Barbara, there'll be a bit of squealing about that too. But I think, the pressures on the economy and the populace are as such that I can't see an easy way out in the longer term without higher revenues coming into the economy and also cutting out some of our outgoings on superannuation in particular.
Barbara, 500,000 Kiwis need a food bank every single month. There has been a steep cut in the food bank money that was going to them. What's in this budget for people who don't have the wherewithal and don't have the untaxed capital gains to be able to make life so fantastic?
When John Campbell asked Nicola Willis this question, what's in the budget for these working families, she said, $7, that will make a meaningful difference. And that reel has gone viral on social media. It's come across my page a number of times. That is not a meaningful difference, $7. So I agree with Fran, there is very little in this budget to support that. The fact that they stripped $1 billion from emergency housing, that's $1 billion from emergency housing, and yet when the government, during Parliament question time, and they're saying, we're so proud we've got families out of hotels. Yes, it's good to get families out of hotels into social housing, but that doesn't mean you shut the door on those hundreds and thousands of people who are waiting, and unless you give them something, they're in cars or in tents or
prison,
on the streets.
or bloody prison, right? They've kicked off there. Claudette, 1,000 kids are waiting at Oranga Tamariki without any social work. There's nothing. What's in this budget for people like that?
Well, and you talked about material wealth, what's in it materially. It's not just the material value system for our whānau, particularly our rangatahi, but it's also the stripping away of their tikanga, their ability to have reo, their ability to know whakapapa, their ability to have connection, whakahono, ki ngā hapu, ki ngā marae, ki ngā iwi. There is no social media group that actually rates the value or the amount of tikanga that each child or each reanga, each generation loses as a result of whānau living in poverty. And that needs to be included in what we lose. So it's not just material wealth. It is also all about whakapapa, and it's all about whakahono ki ngā marae as well. So with those tamariki in Oranga Tamariki, so where is the plan for them?
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Fran, your final word this week, please.
On?
Anything you want, comrade. Go to the mountaintop.
Well, that would be beyond my capability at this stage of my life and trade. I'm still quite optimistic about this country and people's future. I mean, if you've seen a few cycles, and when I was writing in my recent column about about women being paid 2/3 alongside the bloke in the factory, I was that person back in the day. So I look at being on the sweet counter pregnant 8.5 months in at Woolies on being paid a pittance,
Right.
This kind of thing in a world where women had to be tucked away, or they corseted in their pregnancies. I mean, a lot has socially happened over the last 40 or 50 years, and I think we are in a tough period, but I'm pretty optimistic and try to play it forward quite a bit, even though there's a lot of stuff happening now, which is unpalatable, and there does need to be change. But, I've sort of got friends working, to try and release, June McCabe trying to release capital for Māori assets, that type of thing, for investing. There's a lot of work happening out there, which I think is across the board. There's good stuff happening, so I'm trying to focus on that and not drown in the rest.
Fair enough. Barbara, your final word this week?
Yeah, it's really easy to drown in, you look at the budget documents and it's so easy to drown in the forecasts there. But my faith and optimism and hope is actually in the people of New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Like when the times are tough, and I know this for Pacific families and Pacific communities especially, when our families are struggling, we come together and we figure it out. And we're going to have to depend on each other to be able to ride the next 18 months of this government out. But I have faith and hope in the people of New Zealand, particularly our Māori and Pacific families who have been through this time and time and time again. And it's time to vote this government out.
Preach. Claudette, your final word this week, please.
Ki ngā tangata Māori, ki ngā Māori katoa, ka whawhai tonu mātou. Kaore he oti, whawhai tonu mātou. Engari, kaua e ware, hara mai tō mau tuku tō submissions mo te Regulatory Standards Bill. Kaua e ware, hara mai koutou ki te mau nā submissions, mō te rapiri.
Amen. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Comrades, I don't dislike wealthy middle-class Kiwis who have the privilege of all that untaxed capital gain. If your main issue in life is which private school to send your kids to and whether you'll holiday in Bali or Vietnam this year, good for you. I don't really care about your welfare because you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I, like every citizen of a liberal progressive democracy, should care about those on the bottom of the heap getting their teeth kicked in every day. This week's new sanctions against those on welfare were launched, and they are a bitter harvest of spite and malice masquerading as social policy. The money management punishment is called a non-financial sanction. But that's not true. It cuts welfare in half and forces 50% on a card that people can't use to pay rent or bills with. It is designed to make being on welfare impossible, and that's the point. The second sanction is community work experience, which again is a set of hoops that, if not completed, leads to cuts in welfare. The reason the government is introducing these new sanctions is because the regulatory impact statement for the legislation warned these new penalties exacerbates the risk of a client facing hardship. And again, that's the point. National have designed welfare to be so difficult people are forced off it. And how many beneficiaries are currently not complying with the existing job-ready demands? 1.2%. Hardly a hemorrhaging of taxpayer dollars. Once someone is sanctioned with a money management scheme or community work experience scheme, they become ineligible for emergency housing or special needs grants so that they fall over on purpose. MSD now wants 6 monthly reviews, but hilariously, they cut so many staff they can't manage a 6-month review. What was the government's solution to cutting all their staff? Why, they will use AI to find a discrepancy to penalise you with, and they will use AI to reject your claim, so you're forced to find a real staff member to try and get back in. They have doubled the length of time they can punish you for when trawling through your life, and there is no actual clear path off the money management scheme or community work experience scheme once you get punished with it. This government is so hell-bent on screwing over the poor to fund their tax cuts for the rich, they've even gone so far as to go after sole parents who rent a room out to a boarder. Comrades, if a full day's work can't purchase 3 square meals, 24 hours worth of rent and utilities, a fraction of a month's clothing budget, and a reasonable portion to be saved for when you retire, then what the bloody hell are we doing here? This budget did not answer that, and all we saw was National take today what tomorrow never brings. We'll see you next week. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast